Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM, the official podcast of Monsters.rent. I'm Justin Lewis.
And I'm Tanner Whelan.
And we are here to help you tell better stories for yourself and your players as you dungeon master sessions of D&D, Dungeons & Dragons. We'd like to give you some quick announcements. We actually have one before the show, and then after the show, if you want to stick around, we have some more announcements then as well. But first, let's talk about this. Tired of being alone? Are you tired of not having any of your players understand you? Are you tired of never truly belonging? Well, you're in luck. All you need to do is join the Guild. The Guild is a unique and exclusive experience that is only open to Dungeon Masters. It is a full community focused on helping ease your DMing burdens. Want to meet other DMs? Join the Guild. Want to discuss your homebrew ideas with people who would appreciate it instead of just telling your cat? Join the Guild. Want to find a place where all your wildest dreams will come true? Join the Guild. Go to monsters.rent/guild and sign up today for free. Wait, that can't be right. Chuck, can you check this again? Is this supposed to be... What? Oh, they're serious? It's free? Oh, okay. All right. Yes, go to monsters.rent/guild and sign up today for free, even though they are crazy for giving this away for free. Common side effects may include burping, sneezing, laughing, breathing, hearing, listening, tasting, farting, critting, sarcasm, and in extreme cases, explosive diarrhea. Awesome. With that out of the way, we can get into today's show. Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM. Today, I am Justin Lewis. Actually, I'm always Justin Lewis, but today I'm joined with Tanner Whelan. Go ahead and say hi, Tanner.
Hey, guys.
And we have today with us a very special guest, Victor Bavine. And for me, he has a special place in my heart because I first got introduced to really anything to do with Dungeons & Dragons by listening to the R.A. Salvatore books about Dredd Stoerden. And I listened to them on audiobook, and the voice actor who really personified, in my opinion, Drizztorodin was Victor Bavine. So having him here with us is a real treat for me personally, because, like I said, I have fond memories of long road trips listening to Drizzt battle the monsters of the Underdark and then make his way to the surface and kind of go through a similar trek I think a lot of us go through when we're trying to find out who we are and where we fit in life. So thank you for being here, Victor. And if you want to, you can add to that introduction however you want. But thank you for being here.
Sure, my pleasure. I'm thrilled that I've been doing the Drizzt books for about 10 years now, and I think I'm up to 40 plus. I've done all but I think 3 of them.
Wow.
And those were done before I got involved. And I've been an actor my whole life, and I'm also a writer and entrepreneur, and started doing audiobooks about 17 years ago, and this was one of the first really big projects that I got. So, I'm thrilled the fans like it. I get a lot of really fun emails. And in fact, one of the best ones I've ever gotten, I don't want to choose best, but this guy wrote me and said how he was going blind, actually, and he was unable to read to his children anymore. And so they would listen to the Drizzt books as bedtime stories together, and it really brought a tear to my eye. So I'm thrilled to be involved. I love the books. I'm thrilled to be here.
Wow.
Having experiences like that has to be life-changing because in accounting, you don't have the opportunity to change someone's life like that, right?
Yeah.
So, well, let's get into some of our questions. I thought one reason having you on the podcast would be so great is because as people play Dungeons & Dragons, one thing that a lot of people kind of are drawn towards naturally is just kind of the attempts at voice acting. And I think it's a really great way to help your players become immersed. And so I thought it would be a great thing to have you on and kind of talk about that. But you also mentioned that you're also a writer. So tell us a little bit kind of how you got into voice acting and writing and kind of how those two interweave and things like that.
Well, I pretty much always wanted to be an actor. I decided when I was 5 that I wanted to be an actor because I saw this TV show. I wasn't allowed to have a dog. I really wanted a dog, and my mom wouldn't let me get a dog. and I saw this TV show about vaudeville, and there was this one dog act, and I got into my head that I was an actor, I could have a dog, and so anyway, so I decided I always wanted to be an actor, and then I always thought I loved to read, and I'm classically trained as an actor, so I've done a lot of Shakespeare, so I think it really sets you up well for reading large blocks of text and making it understandable, because that's the trick of, being a narrator, is knowing how to use language, what we would call heightened language, to tell the story, but at the same time keep it personal and human without getting too involved in technique. So anyway, so I'd been acting for years, and I was living in LA, and toward the end of my time in LA, my manager asked me, "How would you like to read the Bible?" And I said, "Okay." So I was hired by this company to do, there were like 8 of us, and I read 6 books of the Old Testament, 6 books of the New. And it was pretty cool way to make a living. And then I moved back to New York, and I actually bought this house in New Jersey, in Newark, for God knows why I did it, because I wanted a project to renovate this old historic home. And so I was in the midst of doing that, and it was right when Audible was moving to Newark, moving their headquarters to Newark. And I happened to see an interview with the CEO in the local paper, and I got on the company website and I emailed him. I figured out his email address. It was dkatz@audible.com. And so I just emailed, "Thanks for taking a chance on Newark." I said, "I did the same thing. I bought this house, and my friend said I was crazy to move from Santa Monica to Newark, but here I am, and here's my voiceover demo, and I'd love to come in for an audition." And the CEO emailed me 2 days later and said, "Yeah, come in for an audition." So that's how I got started really doing audiobooks. And that was, gosh, like 2007 or 8. And I've done probably 350 books at this point. And I'd always wanted to be a writer. I'd been writing screenplays when I was in LA, and almost got a couple of movies off the ground. And then I had a project that almost was super close. We had the money and almost in the bank, and then the financial crisis hit, and the money disappeared. I was supposed to direct it, and I'd written the screenplay, and so it all fell apart. And I said, "Well, I've always wanted to write a novel. Now's the time." So I wrote the first draft of the novel, and it was awful. It was basically the screenplay without formatting, and because I didn't know how to write fiction. It was right around that time that I started narrating at Audible. And then 2 years later, I picked up the novel again after having probably narrated 40 books. And I suddenly started writing again. I said, "Oh, I know how to write prose fiction now." Because that was like my 10,000 hours. It was all there. So it all did kind of meld really nicely together. And so that's sort of how I got to do all of it.
Wow. I love that so much. Man, what a roller coaster.
Yeah,
dang.
That's the life of an artist.
So, did you find that you kind of naturally gravitated to narrating the fictional books, or was that purely coincidental that they were like, "Hey, you're great for this"?
I've done a lot of like my most recent book I just finished last week was about the Russo-Ukrainian War. Very intense, deeply historical. Really dense. Normally, the process is generally a book takes about 4 or 5 days to record, and then you come in for like an hour or 2 of pickups, stuff that you got wrong, and you have to go in and fix. And normally, the most I have anywhere between 20 and 50 pickups in a project, when I can knock that out in an hour. This we had 350 pickups. Because the names, the Ukrainian and Russian names, they wanted them so specific and really perfect. And then the longest book I've ever done, single book, was a book called Gotham, which is a Pulitzer Prize winning history of New York City. And it's 2 volumes, and it's 4,000 pages. And that took 4 months. And that...
Wait, so 4,000, that many pages, how many hours is that? Like, it's got to be a lot.
It's about 60 hours.
Hot dang.
Yeah, it's a commitment. It's a great book. I mean, it's a fantastic, and I love New York. I'm a native New Yorker, and I love delving into the history, and so it was fun. But then I love doing the fantasy too. I love doing fiction, and I mean I've done some classic fiction like Vonnegut, but and I'd done a couple of other fantasy series before I got the Drizzt. And the Drizzt thing was, it was interesting how it came to me because they had recorded a couple of the books, not starting from book one, and they had two different narrators, and everybody hated the narrators apparently. And so Wizards of the Coast came to Audible and they said, we need to find a new narrator. So they did a contest where they recorded, they had three of us that Ari Salvatore approved. And then they put it on the fan website, and the fans chose me.
Oh, that's awesome.
53% of the fans chose me. So there was already like a lot of buy-in, and I still get, when people come to those other books, I get all these like Twitter messages saying, what happened? Where'd you go? Did they fire you? No, just be patient. I'll be back. But the fun thing with you were saying about character stuff, character voices, the fun thing about fantasy is that you really can take liberties with the voices. In general, they want you to be really subtle with characters in like obviously in, nonfiction stuff, but even in fiction, they want you to be fairly subtle. But you can just go crazy with the. I love some of the voices that I've managed to create, and it's funny because I won't tell you. I will never reveal this, but Jarl Axel is one of my favorite voices that I created, and a lot of people love that voice. And one of the ways sometimes I'll create voices is I'm so bad at celebrity impersonations that I'll do a celebrity impersonation and it'll come out as a voice, but nobody recognizes it. And that's how Jarl Axel started. So he's based on a celebrity, but I will never tell you who it is.
I'm going to have to go back and listen and kind of play celebrity bingo and see, like process of elimination.
I would love it if you guessed it, but I don't think we will. It's so bad.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I do have to say Jarl Axel he's one of my favorite characters too.
Right.
He's complex, but he's also mysterious and kind of, cheeky, and I think a lot of people idealize that and wish they were like that in real life, right?
Yeah. I think that the genius of Bob's books is that, they're simple enough for young people to understand, but as opposed to so much fantasy or comic book fiction, I really think all great stories, truly great stories, are about moral ambiguity. And that's the heart of the story, is moral ambiguity. It's like, how do you be a good person in an impure world? And I love, I don't know if last summer I got to do a compendium of all Drizzt's diary entries.
Yeah, I heard that.
Wow.
I haven't listened to it, but I wanted to.
Yeah, it was really fun. It was really, really cool. And at the same time, right around the same time, I did the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. And it was similar.
I was going to say.
It was very similar. Yeah.
That's so cool.
So I love that people are getting, like you say, Jarl Axel's such a great character because he's morally ambiguous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And honestly, that is actually something I wanted to talk about, because one of the things that really struck me about your voice acting style, specifically in the Drizzt books, is in those diary entries, because it's one thing to just read a diary entry, but it's one thing to also kind of hear someone read it and really get or feel like you get the emotion behind the entry, right? So how, and you mentioned this before with like heightened language and making it human, what tips would you give to someone who is trying to really convey the deep emotion behind just the words they're saying, right?
Good question. Well, let me go back to, so I do sometimes, I've done classes, audiobook classes for actors. And what I always start people out with is Shakespeare's sonnets. And, this is sort of my motto as a writer is, Mark Twain said, the difference between the perfect word and the almost perfect word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. And so if you're reading really good fiction, you're really imbuing, finding that it's just, I mean, okay, let me back up. So one of the reasons I choose Shakespeare for people to start with. I do a sonnet, and then we get into the books. Is that, the great fear that actors have with Shakespeare and American actors is that it's going to be boring. And the only way it's boring, because it's not boring material, the only way it's boring is to shy away from committing to the emotion of the moment. So it's, if you commit to specifically what you're saying, not a general sort of wash of emotion, you've got to be specifically following so again, that's why classical training is so important for audiobooks, because what you're doing when you're narrating is you're helping the listener follow the thought. So you've got to really follow that thought. And these people, again, like classical characters, they're passionate about their thoughts, these people. What they're thinking is passionate. Whereas so often, and I think it's less true now, but for so often it's been, we hide what we feel with our language, with the things we say. So you've got to be careful. You got to be willing to look for what's the specific thing that's being conveyed with each word. And it becomes very natural, but just commit to a specific meaning behind each word rather than a general, and really just follow the thought moment to moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tanner.
No, I love it because I've had the same experience. I saw some clips of, what's the show called? It's in the actor's studio. What's that one called?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the studio, I think.
Yeah. Thank you. And, they have some actors who read Shakespeare, and I'm like, these guys are amazing, and they do it so differently depending on who's portraying it. And it kind of does go to show what you were saying. It's like, hey, you have to commit to something, and there's no necessarily right way to do it in at least
right.
in certain, stories, right? I think especially going to D&D and other kinds of places where we get the freedom to act, so many players wait until the moment is quote unquote worthy of having like emotion or like being passionate about, but it's like, hey, before that, during mundane things, you can choose to have emotions as well, right? Even when you're buying an egg from the market or whatever else, right?
Yeah. Because sometimes you start, as an actor, you start a scene by asking yourself, what's the preceding moment? What happened before it started? Where's the character coming from? We're always bringing something into every moment. We very rarely arrive, unless you just came from a meditation. You very rarely arrive totally clean. You brought something with you. And how does that affect what you're about to do? And again, I've never played D&D. Actually, I did do a book about playing D&D 2 years ago. It's kind of fun.
Oh, that's fun.
But it how much do people really explore? What's the point of view? What is the life experience of this character, and what's the point of view they're bringing with them? And that's what. And again, it's so much easier when you're working with good material, because that's what Bob's books. They're obviously in a way they're formulaic, but still that ultimately these characters are going to survive, but he still puts you on the edge of your seat. You're still, every time, you're still like worried, when these characters are in jeopardy. And that's just a fantastic, skill and talent. It's just, and again, it's like I said, certain materials better for certain people. I love the questions that Drizzt asks himself. I mean, there are questions that I ask myself. Sometimes I just really can put myself in the moment and think that I'm Drizzt. But that's the key. It's just, and again, audiobooks are so much fun because you get to play all the characters. So you get to keep switching points of view, and nobody thinks they're a bad guy. Everybody thinks they're doing the best they can in the way that they understand the world. Even like, Lolth or, Matron Mesbaris or whoever, They all think they're, doing the best they can in the world that was given to them. And then you have the heroic characters like Drizzt who are willing to push out of the boundaries of the world they were given, question that. Maybe this is not the way it should be. And that's the hero's journey.
Yeah. So if I've understood, it's not so much like acting as it is like adoption. You're adopting the emotions that, this character theoretically has. You use the word subtle, right? Like sometimes you have to be subtle. And I at least in the world of D&D, there are a lot of cliches, right? You have the dwarf who has the Scottish accent, right? Things like that. And I think the subtle word would be very useful for a lot of people out there who might not feel like they can do, the South African accent or what I mean. So what are some tips for kind of increasing the subtle differences between characters, so that way it's apparent that, if I'm talking and then I stop and then I talk again, you can tell it's two different people, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's a great question. And one of the most obvious one is when you're a guy and you're doing a girl's voice. Because you don't want to go up like this because this is ridiculous. It's like
Yeah.
nobody's going to want to listen to that for half an hour, and they're not going to take the conversation seriously. So it's, so you alter things subtly with tone, so I'll for women in particular, I'll basically soften the voice just a little and make it a little bit higher. And maybe the place the confidence comes from is a different place. It's less testosterone driven. And then sometimes you can also change the character with the speed. Some characters talk really fast, or some characters talk really deep. With Dungeons and Dragons, it's easy because then if you're doing, some sort of a bizarre, creature from the underworld, you can really just take a liberty with that. Yeah. So it's tone, speed, and again, if you do like Jarlaxle, I just made a decision that this is what he was going to sound like. And it just sort of fits him, and that's still my voice. It's still clearly my voice, but it's just a subtle shift so you can feel, when a different character is speaking. I mean, but generally, again, this is less about the game and more about audiobooks, but the rule of thumb is the main character in a book should be the closest to your own voice. And then the next closest to your voice should be the narrator of the book. And then from there, you go off, depending if it's really a secondary character, you want to keep it, pretty close to, pretty subtle. But if you start getting into third level and fourth level characters where they really are kind of two-dimensional, you can give them more goofy, voices. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I really like it. Just obviously from a voice acting standpoint, but even for D&D, I think some newer players, because this happens all the time, people come into it and they think, hey, I need to, come up with a crazy voice initially. And it's like, hey, how about you play a character who's actually very close to your normal voice, but you learn how to imbue that with the emotion of the moment in what you're doing and how you're playing the game. And then later on, you can change things up, because you got that initial practice. And especially for DMs, the people running the D&D game. Right. It's okay to have more than you'd think of the players, the characters you're playing, to sound like derivatives of your own voice, because you can still, through tone, through speed, certain things, make them unique. Yeah, I really like that.
And the other thing is, it's kind of a mistake to really emphasize emotion, because that's a result. When you're taught as an actor, you're taught really more about how do you connect with the process, so that you're not going for something that you've predetermined and you're trying to sound like what you already thought about earlier. So basically, the things you think about in a scene is, what does my character want? What are they after? really commit to that. I don't know if you ever watch I Love Lucy, old reruns of I Love Lucy. Well, just, anyway, all right, I'll forget about that. But you commit to what you want, and then basically there are always obstacles to getting what we want. And oftentimes it's another character, or it's a some sort of physical difficulty, or a journey that you have to go on. And so what we do as human beings is we go after what we want, we try something, it doesn't work, we try something else. So it's about pursuing what you want, and then what are your strategies for getting it. So sometimes the strategy will be yelling at somebody and demanding it. Other times it'll be manipulating them, and it can be the same words, but it's a matter of what are the different strategies. If I haven't gotten what I want, what do I try next? And that's what's going to create more of an organic, real feeling to it, because that's what we do in life.
Yeah, that's great.
That's super interesting to me, because I don't think I've ever thought about my characters having strategies, especially even the characters that are kind of bit players. They come in for like 5 minutes, and then we move to whatever else the players are doing. So with that, and obviously with the Shakespeare sonnets, are there any specific things or even general things that you recommend to someone to practice kind of voice acting, I guess?
To practice. Well, I don't know if this is going to mean anything to you guys, but when we work on the sonnets, I always tell people, listen to Frank Sinatra, and listen to the way he uses emphasis to change, in the course of a song. He stays within, and it's specific to sonnets and Shakespeare, because Shakespeare is generally written in iambic pentameter, so you have a meter that you have to adhere to, but you can take liberties within that. So, it's the same thing with Sinatra. Sinatra stays in the what do you call it, the rhythm of the line, and I forget, I'm losing the word, but he stays within the rhythm, but he also takes liberties. So it's in terms of other things, I would just say, just start being conscious and mindful of how you approach things in life yourself, and watch when you're after something, what are your strategies? How do you go from one thing to another? What are your patterns of approaching situations? And, somebody may have, depending on how they were raised, which one will they go for first? Some of them may go for, maybe they're a bully, and the first one is going to be trying to just get it by force. Maybe they were disempowered as children, and so they're going to have to go by manipulation, or they're going to have to be a supplicant, or it depends on, so it's what's the backstory of your character. And you can usually imply that from what, where someone is now in their life. You can sort of create a backstory and say, okay, I can see where this would go. And then, but then, you still got the supplicant who occasionally is going to get angry and demand stuff. They're pushed to a certain place. So it's just a matter of how determined are you to get what you want. I wouldn't worry about, the sound of the voices and all that stuff is almost secondary. The most important thing is grounding it in a kind of reality, especially when you're doing D&D, because I'm imagining it's mostly improv. You're not really given a script, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in improv, if you can really, there's a great book called by Viola Spolin, and it's a book on improvisation. It's a seminal book on improvisation. I forget the name of it, but you look it up, Improvisation by Viola Spolin. And that would be a great, improvisation class would be a great thing for people who are doing D&D. Because it's, and the trick to improvisation is the basic rule is you never say no. So somebody does something, you don't say, no, that sucks, I'm going to do something else. You go with what they brought to it, and then you build on that. You don't like say, no, that, you don't have to internally say, no, that does, it's like brainstorming. You got to keep the ball moving forward on the court. So if someone brings something, okay, how can I use that? But I think that would be probably the most useful thing is an improv class. And there are some great basic exercises in the Viola Spolin book on improvs.
Man, that's wonderful. Honestly, I really like. I don't know. I think we came into this with certain questions, and you just answered like most of them without us even having to ask. I'm just going to throw that out there. One last one that I kind of have is, I think if people aren't grounding, well, let me switch up how I ask this. I think it's very easy for people to feel like they don't need to ground a character in reality because they're like, oh, it's a bit player. It can be a caricature for a joke, Right. Does that hurt the story at all, or is there a place for that?
So there are two ways that I'll answer that question. One, I'm going to go back to I Love Lucy. So I Love Lucy was a really silly sitcom from the 50s. And, Lucille Ball she was a mainstream actress. I mean, she was a bathing beauty, and she was in a lot of dramatic roles. And she became she wasn't that funny a person in real life, but she became this kind of queen of comedy. And the way that stuff is funny, it's because it's the most ridiculous situations, but she commits to it 150%. like the terror that Ricky is going to find out she bought a new hat. And she commits to that 150%, and that's what makes it funny. And then going back to Shakespeare, I don't know if you ever read Hamlet, but so Hamlet's got there's two bit players in Hamlet named Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And they're like his friends from college who come visit, and they're sort of the butt of a lot of jokes in the course of the play. And they don't have a lot to say, and they're famously drab as characters. Well, there was a book that I think it was Tom Stoppard, a play that Tom Stoppard wrote in the 60s, a British playwright, called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And it's basically the Hamlet, the entire play, from the perspective of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. So they're the main characters. So, everything, yes, it depends. If you're a writer too, sometimes you'll put in a two-dimensional character just for comic relief. But even if it's comedy, what makes it funnier, really grounding the comedy, is that character committing to something that is ridiculous. And that's what's going to elevate the comedy rather than making a joke of it. You just commit to something outlandish, and it's going to be funnier. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, I have to say, I am very surprised and pleasantly so that, I came in thinking we were going to talk about voice acting, and we did, but we talked about really the skills behind voice acting, which is, like you said, committing and grounding it in a sort of reality. I love that phrase, because D&D, one thing we always strive for in D&D is that immersion. And if you can bring parts of reality into it, it creates anchor points to reality, and it makes it all feel more real, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just going to be more exciting for everybody if people, and it becomes contagious, because the more one character commits to reality, the more real it becomes for other people. And, you'll go deeper and deeper into a really powerful experience.
Exactly. Well, Victor, I think we're actually coming up on the time we've allotted ourselves. So thank you so much. I can't believe it went that fast, but thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Honestly.
Yeah. Usually before we end, we all give everyone kind of a last minute, like, here, listener, this is the last thing I'd like to say. So I'll start, and then Tanner can go, and then Victor, if you'd like to share one last thing. Listener, I would just recommend, with your voice playing or voice acting in your games, the biggest thing I would probably say is try and make the characters real, from a sense of what are they thinking about, what do they care about, even if they're a shopkeeper in some tavern or something, like, think about why they're there and what they want out of any situation. I think that'll take you a long way.
And kind of spinning off on that, I think we sweat the small stuff too often, and that's what I've realized here. You don't have to get the perfect voice that you were imagining for a character. That's not what's going to sell it. You could do a very bad Christopher Walken impression, and that could be a voice. That's fine. No one's going to judge you for that because they don't know who you were trying to do. What will break it for them is if you're not fully committed and if you haven't grounded it in reality. So, yeah.
And going on what both of you have said, the great fear of any kind of performing is that you're going to be humiliated and people are going to judge you. And the more you commit to an objective and you involve yourself in look at it more of as an activity, that you're after something and you're committed to that, the less time you will have to think about what other people are thinking about you.
Wow.
And the more powerful, the more powerful the experience will be. So
I love it.
Mic drop. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here with us, Victor. Before we let you go, how can people reach out to you, support you, see what you're up to, and follow you?
You can follow me on Twitter. It's at Victor Bavine. Instagram, I have a pretty active Instagram page. Also on Facebook, Victor Bavine, and VictorBavine.com. If anyone is out there and has a book that I've had a lot of independent authors have reached out to me to narrate their books because they know that people when they finish the Drizzt, they'll say, "What should I listen to now?" And so I've worked with a lot of independent authors. So I'm out there.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, listener, we'll be back next week for another amazing episode. Until then, let's go ahead and roll initiative. Thank you for listening to today's show. We really appreciate your support and your patronage. We have a few more announcements to go over. First,
did you ever fall in love with the library as a kid? It was a place where you could experience 1,000 stories without having to buy 1,000 books. That is what Monsters.rent can do for your D&D campaign. You can rent and swap out as many quality miniature monsters and creatures for your D&D party as you could ever want, without having to buy them. You can rescue villagers from a kobold camp, or lead your party through the fighting forest, or many more adventures. We're coming out with new bundles all the time. Just sign up for our subscription to get access to your own personal library of minis. Go to monsters.rent to find out more. That's the website. Monsters, with an S, .rent. Get your library pass to a world of minis today.
we also wanted to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by Stardust and Dragons. I'm going to let one of the cast of Stardust and Dragons, Christian Hatcher, and his crew tell you a little bit more about it.
This August, a new adventure podcast is coming to a platform near you, filled with action.
Shoot one of the two of them. We can't keep taking hits like that.
Drama.
Everything that she's been doing, everything she's going to do, finally sets in.
And Stardust.
Help! Help! Someone, please!
Find out more about this epic odyssey at stardustanddragons.com, where adventure awaits in the stars.
That's all the announcements we have today. Again, thank you so much for everything you do for us. You make this show possible. Like we said before, we'll be back next week with another great episode, and until then, let's go ahead and roll initiative.